All right, guys. So welcome to Hacking the Coding Interview. As Tank said before, we've done this a few times before, but in this workshop, you're going to learn about how to prepare for the coding interview. Also, we'll give some tips on where you can find internships, job opportunities, that kind of stuff. So yeah, let's jump right into it. All right, so just to do some quick introductions, my name is David Dempsey. I'm a fourth-year computer science student at Ucsd. Right now, I'm an incoming software engineer at Palantir. So basically a big data processing company for like government agencies and like corporations. Kind of confusing to explain, but feel free to look it up if you like. I'm also a head tutor for CSU 100 and advanced data structures class. I have my own little startup called Muse. It's basically music compatibility startup. Feel free to like access my app if you want. Hyperlinks on the slides. And yeah, also president of ACM Hack and CS for Each. Yeah. Oh, did not mean to click that. All right.
Awesome. Hi everyone. My name is Tang. I was gonna say my last year, but I'm actually like a fifth-year computer science student. Currently, this year's and was last year ACM's professional development director. So I like to give a lot of workshops on just like networking, interviewing, all that good stuff. In terms of like internships, I was a past intern at NASA and worked a few other technical and non-technical internships at very, very small companies. Currently, I work kind of like almost full-time as a product manager at a fintech company. And yeah, I'm also kind of in the startup space with David. I'm the co-founder of Your Year. And my other co-founder is actually in this call right now, Steven Steiner. And he's going to hate for this plug, but we're looking for extra developers. So if you guys are interested, feel free to message me or Steven on Discord. Beside that, in terms of my kind of like interview experience, I've gotten a good amount of kind of like interviews for software engineering and product management at like various startups, big companies, small companies. So I have a good amount of experience. Most of them, I'm going to admit, were mostly failures, but I kind of learned from them. So I would love to kind of like show you guys what not to do and in order to maximize your chances at acing the interview. But yeah.
Cool. So just to jump right into it, I'm assuming if you guys are here, you might already know what an internship is, but just to give some quick background on an internship, it's basically an opportunity for you to work at a company, basically temporarily for like a summer or like over the fall, and you work under their employees and basically like see what it's really like to be an employee at that company. So they give you some work to work on. Sometimes you'll have like an internship project where you work on a feature that might be deployed at the end of your internship. Sometimes you'll just like shadow someone and work with them on whatever they're working on. It really varies from company to company, but it's a great chance to get some work experience. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, just to give some explanations on like where you can find internships, UCSD has a few really good tools for finding internships. One of them is called Handshake. So I know this is plugged a lot by the UCSD Career Center, but basically you can sign in with your UCSD SSO, and there's a bunch of job opportunities that are both like UCSD specific. So if you want to work at like the Supercomputing Center or even like do research at Scripps or like that stuff, there's a lot of jobs on Handshake for that. But not only just that, I know a lot of tech companies like in the area and also like in the Bay, for example, post on Handshake as well. So it's a good chance, or a good place to find some good job opportunities. The Jacob School of Engineering job portal is also a good resource. This typically partners like mainly with San Diego companies from what I've seen. So I think like Neuro is one of them, like Qualcomm's a big one on there. But if you're looking for like San Diego area jobs, you can find a lot of them on the Jacob School of Engineering job portal. I think it's only available to students in the Jacob School of Engineering. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but good chance to find like some job opportunities in there. And like a lot of these postings are not like super flooded with people from a ton of schools. A lot of them are just like UCSD specific. There's also Indeed. So Indeed, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, and Google. These are all websites you can use to basically like look up job postings. So what I did before is like I'd go on the Glassdoor usually or LinkedIn and I just search like software engineer position or like software engineer internship, and it'll come up with a bunch of like recently posted positions. You can also like search for companies, but generally just like really good resources for finding jobs. Whether like you want to look for a specific company or you just want to find like recently listed job opportunities. And yeah, you can also search by like the area you're in. So if you want to find an internship like in New York City, for example, you can filter by region, that kind of stuff. But these are all like really good websites for finding those opportunities. Also like networking. So networking is a really strategic way that you can get internships. It's important that you like talk to people, especially recruiters, if you're looking to maybe have like a leg up for internships, because when you apply to jobs on like job portals, you're kind of just like throwing your resume at them and they'll look up your resume for maybe like 30 seconds to a minute, and sometimes they'll like move on to the next person. But when you're networking with someone, when you like see them, you have a conversation, you're more than just like a sheet of paper. You're an individual they're talking to. You could show your personality, you could show your interests. So it's really important that you take advantage of networking when you're looking for internships or job opportunities. So specifically, there's a bunch of career fairs at UCSD. I'm not sure if the one for this fall has already happened. Someone might want to bring that up in the chat. But if you're looking for like good job opportunities that you can find at UCSD's career fairs, you can sign up for those on, is it Handshake? I'm not sure if it's Handshake where they post the sign up for the career fair. It looks like the job career fair already happened today. So that's kind of a bummer, but I think they do it in winter and in spring. So even if you missed today's career fair, you can still go to other ones other times of the year. There's also like a bunch of company info sessions. So I do know these are on Handshake, but often like if you're signed up on Handshake's mailing list, they'll send out emails. They're like, Qualcomm's having an info session at this time and day, feel free to sign up. And usually like not a ton of people go to these. I feel like it's actually kind of underutilized because it's a good chance for you to learn more about the company you're interested in. Also like network with a recruiter maybe, because oftentimes they'll like ask questions from the audience. You can really put your name out there and like show that you're really interested in working for this company. So if you do see a company that you're interested in and you want to learn more about it, go on Handshake and check out like company info sessions because there's a lot of them posted. They're pretty much like every single week you can find one for different companies. But yeah. Also, there's like hackathons as well. So hackathons are a good way to, one, like get a good project that you can work on and put in your resume. And two, you can meet like a bunch of also like really motivated programmers as well. I think for me, like when I went to my first hackathon, which is like SD Hacks 2018, I met a lot of like really cool UCSD students that were upperclassmen that I kind of consider like my mentors as well. They showed me like what they did to get their internships, strategies for, you know, meeting other people and being successful in general. So it's important like to, you know, talk to people at hackathons, like especially mentors, people that want to help you out. It may not be the best place to like find job opportunities. Like I would not suggest going up to someone and be like, hey, can you like refer me to this internship, like some stranger? But like you can talk to them and like get advice from them. And there's also going to be like company people there that might collect your resume, but I wouldn't like go up to people and like ask for jobs or anything. And then there's obviously like Discord servers. So I'll go into this a little bit more in a little bit, but there's like a cscareers.dev Discord. If you search it on Google, it's a really good Discord for like job postings. They usually like post it like the day it's posted, and there's like a ton of people on there just grinding for internships or job postings, or job opportunities, I mean. And there's like other career Discords. But yeah, I'll go into that in a little bit. And then lastly, like if you're more into like research stuff, for example, you can go to like professor office hours. I think this is like one thing that people don't utilize as much as they should. Like a lot of people, especially like when I was a freshman, I was always really intimidated by professors. I would think like, oh, like, I don't know, I don't want to waste this professor's time. Like they seem so intimidating. I don't really have anything good to ask. But like sometimes you don't even need to go to office hours with anything super good to ask. Like you could just like ask about their research, like get to know them better. But really like getting to know a professor during their office hours is the best way to, you know, land yourself research opportunities. If you know they're connected with a company, you can learn more about that from them. But office hours are a super important resource that I think like especially younger people should utilize and like realize is a powerful resource to have.
Awesome. So after you apply, hopefully, you know, you'll get an interview back. Unfortunately, there's more than kind of just like one step. It really kind of like depends on the company you apply for. Like there can be like one round of interviews to probably like 7 or 8. So it really just depends. And there's different stages of the interview that will show in the next slide. Yeah, so normally when you first like kind of apply and you're applying for a software engineering internship, you'll probably get like a coding assessment, which we'll go into a little bit later. But basically, you have to do like a coding problem. After that, you'll normally be kind of like graded, kind of like how well you did on like how many test cases you passed, how many problems you were able to complete. After that, you'll typically get like a phone screen. So a phone screen would normally be with like a recruiter. And then normally after that, sometimes you'll have a phone screen with like a technical person or like the hiring manager. So this one might be a little more technical. You might have to do a couple before moving on to kind of like the on-site or kind of like video interviews. And this can span the on-site interviews from maybe like 2 or 3 rounds in total, or some companies have something called like a super day where you literally do like 4 interviews back to back on the same day. Honestly, me personally, I prefer when companies do kind of like a super day because it's kind of like you don't have to wait for like do one interview, wait for the next one, then do another one, just kind of get it all over in kind of like just one day. But going into depth coding assessments on the next slide is As mentioned, you normally solve kind of like a coding algorithm question. Normally, it's like when you hear leak code, this is where like you'll initially get tested on leak code. And these are some of the platforms that that companies typically use. We have HackerRank, CodeSignal, HireVue, so many few more out there. But I would normally suggest like try to like visit these websites and see how they work. Because I remember for like on LeetCode, for example, right? The interface is so easy. All you really have to do is like provide the algorithm. The inputs are like kind of like given for you. They have all like the test cases. But I remember distinctly for JP Morgan, they had kind of like their own kind of like, I think it was HireVue, but basically you had to like take an input and process it yourself. And like, I did not do that in my studying. And I remember I spent more than like half the time trying to figure out how to like parse a string into kind of like a string of numbers into actual numbers. And it literally took me like half the time. And I ended up like not being able to complete. I was able to complete the problem. It was one I knew already, but since I had to rush so fast, I wasn't able to kind of complete it. Sometimes in these coding assessments too, it won't just be like algorithm questions. You might get asked multiple choice questions on kind of like CS concepts, or if you're applying to kind of like a quant firm. I remember on one aspect of the coding challenge was asking kind of like math questions. This is normally kind of like only like quant firms like Citadel, Acuna Capital would kind of like ask these questions, but other companies you might be asked about kind of like just like general programming and computer science knowledge. So it's really good to kind of like look up the company you're applying for and kind of like maybe ask around if like somebody interned at that company, maybe just ask them like what type of topics were covered on that particular coding challenge. Yeah, so after you kind of complete the coding challenge and you do well, you'll normally get like a phone screen. The first one is normally with a recruiter, and this is just behavioral. You'll be asked the typical questions like, why do you want to work with us? Tell me a little bit about yourself, go through like a resume walkthrough. This is also a really good time to ask the recruiter more logistics about the internship, kind of like what the dates could potentially be, maybe kind of like what the pay range is, what team you would be kind of like working on. This is meant to be like not stressful at all, so do not stress. I know a lot of people stress about kind of like anything behavioral, but just be yourself. You know, when you kind of like answer questions about yourself, just be candid. Try to kind of like talk like you're talking with like a friend almost. You know, just kind of like talking, introducing more about yourself. Because like most of the time, the phone screen is just to see if like you're not a crazy person. Most of the time, if you just be calm, talk about yourself, you didn't lie about anything on your resume and everything kind of adds up, you'll probably be moved on to the next interview. So be calm. Best way to prep for this is just like do some mock interviews with your friends, have your friends ask you kind of like behavior questions. I normally just like to go to Google and type in like top behavior questions for the tech industry and have my friends kind of like ask me that. But after the phone interview, you move on to the technical phone interview sometimes. And this one is, as mentioned before, you'll normally be asked questions by like a hiring manager or like a technical person. For software engineering, you'll be might be talking with like a software engineer or a software engineering manager. And they might ask you kind of like the same behavior questions, but they'll definitely kind of like ask you some either technical questions or just knowledge-based questions. Technical questions might be like very easy algorithm questions. I remember I've got this before and I had a few friends get asked this before. It's like how to reverse a string. Sounds very easy, but when you don't have paper on hand and you need to explain that over the phone, it might be just a little difficult. So be prepared to be asked kind of like easy-ish kind of coding algorithm questions on the technical phone interview. In addition to, you might be asked questions about just like general programming knowledge. If you go to like the next slide, one common fundamentals that are normally asked is like object-oriented programming. It might not even be related to your actual role. People just want to see if it's that kind of like you have that initial computer science knowledge and background too. For some kind of like front-end internships I've seen, if their stack is like kind of like React or JavaScript, some of the questions that you might be asked is like about JavaScript. I remember I applied to this one internship and it was kind of like a smaller company. I didn't think the interview would be that hard. I remember like that was the company that asked me like how to reverse a string. But remember the next interview I got, it was on the phone still, but they asked me about JavaScript. And you guys know me, I'm not really a coder, so I didn't know anything about JavaScript. Like they asked me all these like, I forgot what the question was. It was something about like tags or like calling something. Did not know how to answer it. So if you're applying to like a front end position, or the position says like preferred knowledge of like JavaScript or React, make sure you know all like the fundamentals about it. Vice versa, if it's kind of like a very, let's say, you apply to like a game development internship where you like, where one of the kind of skills you need is Unity, you better practice Unity and know all kind of like the key core questions about it. And yeah, this is kind of just like a funny meme that I really liked is, can't wait for my first coding interview. And the interview is about to end this whole man's career. And it might just be on like the first stage too. So best be prepared so this won't kind of happen to you.
Yeah, also just like have a bit more of a serious take on this meme. I think like for everyone, don't be discouraged if you fail your first few interviews. For me, like I failed like probably a dozen interviews. And like it's just, these coding interviews are not easy, honestly. It's gonna take some time and like a lot of practice to really get it down. But the thing is, you just got to keep practicing, you got to keep going. And eventually like you will land that job, but you really just need to, stay hopeful and, stay on top of what you got to do. Cool. All right, so just to hop into the technical interview. So typically after you pass like a phone screen, you'll move on to a technical interview. And so this is usually like a one-on-one phone interview or a video interview with an engineer or a manager at the company you're applying for. So this is someone that like knows the tech stack, is very proficient, and like knows exactly what goes on in the company, what you should be qualified to know to actually have the position. These technical interviews can vary in length. So sometimes you'll have like an on-site interview. I think we'll talk about that in the next few slides. But if you have just like one singular interview with an engineer, it's typically going to be around 30 to 60 minutes. They'll ask you usually one question, sometimes two questions if it's on the easier end. And they want you to solve that question alongside them. So one thing that's really important for the technical interview, and I think like cannot be emphasized enough, is they're testing you like on your problem solving skills, not just your coding abilities. You really need to speak like your thought process as you go through it, because they want to see like how you think about the problem. Even if you don't know how to solve it, you need to talk through like your brainstorming strategies. Like think about like, oh, what data structures could I use to solve this problem? Or like what kind of algorithms might be useful? And as you talk through this solution with your interviewer, oftentimes they'll say like, well, like maybe that's not the best approach, or like they'll be like, you're going in the right direction. Have you considered like maybe doing this implementation? Like they'll help you out as you do this interview, but you need to make sure like you talk through your thought process, or else like they can't really give you that help as you go through it. It's also important to ask questions when you're stuck. Oftentimes like you will hit block in your interviews because like these questions are not always going to be super easy. So try to think through the problem for yourself. Try to come with brainstorm ideas, I guess, like try to figure it out before you ask questions. But if you spend like, more than 3 to 5 minutes on like one part of the question, ask the interview for help. Like just ask a question like, I'm not really sure if this is the best implementation. Like, do you have any advice, for example? So just, take that into consideration. One last thing too is like dress appropriately. This varies from company to company, I've learned, but you're interviewing for the job positions. You don't want to like come in with like, dirty hair, like look like you haven't showered or something. Shout out to the Warren students. But yeah, basically you just want to make sure that you look appropriate. You don't have to wear a collared shirt always, but but you want to at least like look somewhat put together. One thing that companies really care about, I've learned too, is like a culture fit. So do some research on like what the company's like. For example, if you're going to interview for JP Morgan, you should probably wear a collared shirt because this is like a very professional company. But if you're interviewing for like, I don't know, like a more low key like startup in the Bay, or like maybe even like Facebook or Google, they have a lot more of a lax tech culture where you don't really need to like be super dressed up. But you still want to look nice for the interviewer, obviously. And yeah, so sometimes you won't have the technical interview. Sometimes you go straight to the on-site interview. The on-site interview is a bit more comprehensive. It's very similar to the technical interview. But instead of having just one interview, usually for the on-site, you'll have like 3 to like 5 interviews. I would say usually 3 interviews depending on the company. But sometimes companies will like fly you out to wherever they're located. So before quarantine, oftentimes they'll like fly you to their headquarters. They'll like limo you from the airport. It's like kind of crazy how much they do for you. Nowadays, usually it's like just over Zoom or like on like Microsoft Teams. They'll have you like just meet for this on-site interview. And typically these are like 3 separate interviews and 3 separate engineers, and they'll test you on different things. So sometimes it's pure leak code. So for example, like you might have like 3 different leak code questions, depending, like varying from data structure to data structure, or like different types of algorithms, different types of things you should know to get into the company. Other times it'll be different depending on like what you're doing. So when I did my like Palantir on-site interview, for example, they had a technical interview, they had like a system design interview, and then they had like a learning interview, which is kind of interesting. Basically, they like teach you new technology and then we do apply it. So every company does their on-site interview different. I would say most commonly you'll have 3 leak code style questions and like maybe a system design question. But it really does vary. So I would say, like Tang said, do your research. On these like CS career Discord channels, for example, you can often like search the company and people will talk about like the interview process, because like everyone's curious and how it goes. So really take advantage of that. Like try to dig deep and figure out what the company wants you to know. Oftentimes too, like the recruiter will give you hints. I think like one thing that's a good resource to do is ask your recruiter questions. Like their job is to get you the job, basically. They get paid more if they get you the job. So there's only so much they can reveal to you, but it doesn't hurt to ask questions. Maybe you could ask like, hey, like what are some like main focuses for this interview I should focus on? And maybe they'll tell you like, oh, like maybe you should like really know your data structures fundamentals, specifically like trees or something. Ask those questions. Like there's no harm in really like asking too many questions to your interviewer or to your recruiter, I mean, because their job is to help you out in the end. So yeah, usually you'll be asked like technical questions, but also sometimes some standard behavioral questions, like why do you want to work for this company? What are your like inspirations? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Those type of questions you should pretty much like know. These aren't like super hard questions, but it's good to just study behavioral questions. Make sure you know how to talk about yourself, your projects. Just like know that pretty well before you go into the interview. Yeah, I already kind of talked about like technical questions about the programming language or technology. Usually you could choose the programming language. It depends what you're interviewing for. Some companies like you interview for a very specific language. So this summer I did like an online assessment for I think it was like Acuna Capital or something. I didn't pass, but it was like C++ specific. So they asked like a ton of C++ specific questions. I did my questions in C++. Very difficult, but usually you can like choose. Sometimes they'll make you do it in a certain language. But for the most part, you have some freedom over that. And I would say like for the coding questions, usually they're like leak code easy, medium level. Again, this does vary from company to company. If you're interviewing for like Hudson River Trading, for example, which is like one of the top paying like trading tech companies, they're going to ask you leak code hards. But if you interview for like maybe like Google or Amazon or Facebook, they'll ask you like more leak code medium, maybe even like some leak code easy questions. So they don't really expect you to like answer these like super, super difficult questions. There are exceptions to this, but in general, I would say like study leak code medium level questions for your interviews. And yeah, it usually lasts between like 3 to 6 hours, depending on how many interviews there are. Cool.
Awesome. So we kind of taught you guys how the interview works, but the most important thing is actually preparing for the interview. I know sometimes, like in my opinion, I feel like the best way to get experience and practice is by actually doing interviews. So like I know some people, they just like to literally use interviews, like actual interviews, as like a way to practice. But it's kind of like, what if you interview at a company you think you didn't really like, so don't care about, but you're in the interview and you really want that kind of like company? So in my opinion, it's better just to prepare beforehand, so you go to every actual interview prepared as possible. And there's 2 types of questions that you need to prepare for: technical questions. You'll see them in the coding and on-site interviews, as David mentioned, but also a lot of people forget to neglect behavior questions as well. We'll be first going over kind of like coding questions. So David, if you want to take that over again. You're on mute.
Thank you. So yeah, how can you practice for your coding questions? Well, there's really good resources for doing it. I think the main one that people always bring up is leak code, but there's other resources as well that we'll quickly talk about. The first one's Cracking the Coding Interview. This is a classic book that a lot of people know about. Basically, it's a set of, as it says, like 189 programming questions and solutions. These are like very commonly asked questions that you might get on the interviews, typically like based in fundamental data structures and algorithms. So I would say if you're like looking for a starting point, this is a good book to go with. But it's not free, so you do have to pay like 20 bucks on Amazon to get this book. But it's a good resource for fundamentals. I've heard from various people like it's kind of outdated. I still think it's a really, really good resource. I know a lot of friends that have graduated and got like full-time jobs, and they didn't even leak code. They just use this book. So take that as you will. It's a really good resource. I use it. And yeah. Another really big one is leak code. So this is the one you're going to hear everywhere. Everyone's going to tell you leak code, leak code, leak code. You really need to study your leak code questions, know your fundamentals. this is like, I think, the best way that you can study for your technical interviews. There's a lot of really good questions you can find in LeetCode. I mean, basically every type of technical interview question that you could think of, unless it's like company specific, it's usually going to be on LeetCode. If not, there's going to be some variation of that question that you might be asked in an interview on LeetCode. One really good list that I think is like the best preparation list for your interviews that relies on LeetCode questions is called the Blind 75 list. So if you Google Blind 75, or if someone wants to link this in the chat, this is basically a set of 75 really good LeetCode questions that I think are like fundamental to doing well in your interviews. So they vary from like arrays to like trees, different types of data structures, like even like binary stuff. All these different types of questions you can review. They give like direct links to the LeetCode question. And I think honestly, if you can do every single Blind 75 question like by heart, like you know how to do it, you understand the question inside and out, you could pretty much get a job at any FANG company. Now take that as you will, like some companies are different from others, but I think this is like a very good list. I think this really helped me get my job. I relied on this summer. So I cannot recommend this enough. And yeah, thank you, Stephen, for linking that in the chat. Another really good website is CodeSignal. So CodeSignal is one of those websites I think that companies also will like test you on. How it works is it's very similar to like a regular technical interview. They'll ask you typical like technical questions. This is not like with an interviewer, but like you'll get this online assessment. Typically like 3 to 5 questions you'll have to solve within maybe like an hour and a half to like 2 hours. And after you complete this coding assessment, they'll give you a score. So I believe the score is out of like 900. I want to say, I could be wrong. It might be 800. But the score like is like an assessment per se of your technical ability, kind of like an SAT score. It's a bit subjective, but it varies depending on how fast you solve the questions, how many questions you get through, and how many test cases you pass as well. So I know like I think Robinhood and like Roblox use CodeSignal, but another really good website you can also review on. So even though it's like used for interviews, you can also find like resources for doing other types of questions on there that might be commonly asked. Very similar as HackerRank. HackerRank doesn't give you a score, I believe, but it's just like another website that like interviewers will use. You'll solve some technical questions and you submit it, and you don't really know like how you did until that company gets back to you. But again, there's like other resources for learning questions on there as well. They have problem sets like for arrays, data structures, that kind of stuff. So good to check out if you're looking for like another resource that's not CodeSignal or LeetCode. And then another one that I think is kind of slept on a little bit is Geeksforgeeks. This isn't like a coding website, but it's kind of like a Wikipedia for computer science, I would say. So this is the kind of stuff that like you'll learn in your classes like CSE 101, CSE 105, 2021. These are like fundamental computer science questions, but not only like, the stuff you learn in those classes, but like stuff like, the benefits and like disadvantages of object-oriented programming. Big questions that might be asked in an interview that may not technically be coding related, but still related to the fundamentals of computer science, and that I think are super important to know for your interviews. So I recommend like going on Geeks4Geeks, just like browsing through it, brushing up on the stuff you learned in your classes. Because for a lot of us, it's been like a year or two since you learned it. So go on Geeks4Geeks, like make sure you know the fundamentals super well. Because I think that's like one thing the companies really look for is like a strong set of fundamentals. And yeah, so whiteboarding also is a really good way you can prepare for your interviews. Basically what whiteboarding is, it's like when you're doing mock interviews, or like, for example, if you're like just alone, you can work through a question and you solve it on a whiteboard as you do it. Because a lot of times when you're explaining to an interviewer, they want you to like show like how you're thinking through a problem. So whiteboarding is a good way to just like walk through the problem. I think like whiteboarding is great for these like linked list type questions, for example, because you're drawing out like where the pointers go. You really understand like how the problem works, and you're showing it in like a visual way. So being able to explain your coding problems on a whiteboard is a super valuable skill to have. And also like even if you're whiteboarding alone, I would suggest like just talking out loud, talk through your thought process, pretend like you're talking to an interviewer. One thing is like that I've heard is pretty common is like the rubber ducky talk. So like a lot of coders will have like a rubber ducky on their desk, and they'll like basically just talk through their problem to a rubber duck, and like eventually they can like talk through the solution to their own problem. So that's like one strategy for just like talking out how you would get to your solution. But I really suggest whiteboarding because a lot of times, like when you do an on-site interview, they will like put you on the spot. They'll like give you a whiteboard and they're like, okay, solve this question. So it's good to get some practice for that because it can be really intimidating if you get an on-site and they're just like, you're right there with a bunch of engineers staring at you. So good to get some practice with that before you actually get to that stage. And yeah, I think this is Tang, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yes, sir. So, yeah, so as I mentioned, technical questions are very crucial, but behavior, kind of culture fit, being able to kind of like communicate really good and just talking about yourself is really crucial. So, for behavioral questions, I like to normally break it down to three types of questions. You have the questions talking about who you are, talking about like your school, your past experience, just like your general TLDR about yourself. And I know I just said experience, but you also need to know how to talk about like specific experiences on your resume. Sometimes like there'll be a very broad question like, oh yeah, walk me through your resume. I wouldn't be careful when you do this because sometimes people can tell that you're looking at your screen. But sometimes if it's like a Zoom, a Zoom or video kind of like interview, I like to have my resume kind of like on a separate screen. It's better just to memorize it and kind of just like go through it. And sometimes they'll ask you like very specific questions. Like if I interned, let's say at this certain company, they might ask me a question. So like, what was your impact or what did you do at this particular company? So basically for this, you gotta know your resume inside and out, literally every single line, every single number, everything that you put down. The last one is kind of like a little bit more abstract. These are like kind of like situational questions. So these are questions when interviews ask you like, tell me about a time you had to work with like a very hard coworker, and what problem did you work on and like how did you get it solved? Talk about a time where you were able to like influence your team. Talk about a time you overcame a big challenge. So these are like very situational questions. And yeah, the next slide, please.
I just wanted to add on one thing. Don't lie on your resume, because like you will be asked like questions about the technology you put in your resume, especially if you don't have experience to back it up. I think like one thing, if you have project experience, like then you could put it in your skills section. But if you say like, oh, like I know Ruby, and then you don't have any experience with Ruby, and an interview asks you like a Ruby question, it's just gonna look really bad, even if it's not even like related to the job. So just don't lie on your resume. It's really just doing more harm than good. Yeah, I just really want to emphasize that. It's important.
Yeah, and then Alistair, actually, I was gonna say exactly what he said, but yeah, just don't lie in general. It's not a good skill or habit to have. But yeah, so a lot of times people are kind of like, how do we prepare for these kind of like behavior interviews? You know, you had talked about like your weaknesses, talked about these like weird scenarios you really don't think about in our day-to-day lives, but they're actually not that bad to prepare for. And on the next slide, we'll show you the number one way to prepare for these questions. Do mock interviews with friends. So like, as mentioned, like you could do it with a rubber ducky. But I'm gonna be honest, I never heard of that technique. I'd rather just actually do it with like an actual human being giving me the questions. But you can do practice questions with a rubber ducky, just kind of like have like a prompt of questions, maybe kind of like randomize it and pretend that rubber ducky is asking you that question, have your friend kind of ask you. But just like everything, it takes a lot of practice and time. I was talking to David right before this. Is kind of like we were talking about how we do workshop so many times that it's kind of like almost second nature to us. You know, for behavior questions, you want to practice it so much where like it doesn't matter what question is asked for you, it's like second nature how to answer it. You know, so that's definitely like the best way to prepare for these types of questions. Just practice. And a really good way to know what type of like questions a company were asked, or even technical questions, is using kind of like Glassdoor. If you guys aren't familiar, Glassdoor is kind of like a website that is like basically a database of almost every single company, and it has like self-reported data from employees of that companies, and people like write reviews, average salaries, and there's also a really cool interview section where people report kind of like the actual interview questions they got at that company. So this is what I always did before any interview. I would go to Glassdoor, search up that company on Glassdoor, click the interviews tab, and kind of look through all the entries on what kind of questions those people were asked. When you go to use Google too, you might find something kind of like on Reddit or kind of like a Facebook group or like Discord group. Like for Google, you can type in like, for example, if you wanted to you're interviewing at Google, for example, you could type in like Google software engineer and intern questions. And for me, if you want to look at the most recent ones, I was typing like 2021. Normally like Reddit career, their subreddit career questions, CS career questions, people normally kind of post about kind of like the questions they get for that year. So that's a really good tip. And I'm not going to lie, I looked some of this stuff up before, and the questions that I saw on these like subreddits or forums were the exact same questions that I got. So sometimes like for interns, they ask the same general questions. So it's sometimes good to be prepared as most as possible and using any available resource you have. So we taught you how to prepare, but I'd say procrastination is one of the biggest reasons why I personally think a lot of people don't succeed in kind of interviews, because like we have all the steps there. Seems pretty simple, right? You do mock interviews, you follow the blind 75 kind of like studying for a class, you just go through it every single day. But I would say the number one thing that kills people is consistency. In order to do well, you got to practice, like a lot of people during the summer like to practice multiple hours a day. And I know like most of the time internships are meant for like juniors or seniors, but I know freshmen who haven't even taken like CSE 12 get internships because they're consistent and they're studying every single day in the summer or kind of like throughout the year. So I'd like to introduce some study methods to you guys for your success. The number one thing, of course, I'd say in general is doing leak code. And it's really good to kind of have a routine, a set routine or schedule. Recently, I had a friend ask me kind of like, how were you able to like stay consistent with leak code on top of like, school, all your other extra commitments? Start off something small, do one question a day. And a typical tip that I've heard from people who are really good at leak code and that I use myself is take a leak code question, right? Try to solve it without any resources for around 20 to 30 minutes. If you can't solve it after that, look at the answer solution. And after that, really try to master it. After you look at the answer solution, I would redo it just to kind of like, run through it again, but try to revisit that question maybe like the following week or something, But as David mentioned, one a day is like actually the key. And if you think about it, it's not that bad. Like if you do the blind 75, if you spend one question a day and you really immerse yourself and understand that, that's 30 questions in a whole month. You can tackle the blind 75 in 2.5 months, and on top of like, you'll probably do like mock interviews, this and that, like 3 months of hard studying, I can guarantee it, you'll get an internship for sure.
Oh yeah, just adding on to that. So Nick said, don't you need premium to see answers? So for the leak code specific questions, like sometimes you do need premium. But there's also like a discussion tab you can go on. So it's like kind of a forum for that specific question. And you can see different strategies people did to solve that question and their code to do it. So you could look at like the premium leak code solutions, or you can look at the discussion tab and find like community solutions as well. So you don't necessarily need premium to see those answers.
Yeah, and another way to stay sharp for coding questions is like, in addition to leak code, this is what I always recommend people. You can do like competitive programming. It's a fun way, if you're into like competition and whatnot. And the questions there sometimes are a little bit more abstract than leak code. So if you're able to solve some competitive programming questions, you'll be way more than prepared for leak code. The other way is just actual coding. I'm pretty sure everyone who has an internship can speak on the fact that like you'll probably never use an algorithm question in an actual internship or even job. But what will you do in your actual job? You'll actually be like coding, So I'd recommend like, find a project, join ACM projects, join like a hackathon to actually start just knowing how to code too. And it does you benefit because when you actually start an internship, you don't have to like onboard too much if you already know how to like just code applications and whatnot. So these are other 2 ways to just like stay sharp for coding questions, because the more you do anything related to coding, the more kind of like your mind gets kind of like smart and more broad on kind of like all these like concepts in general.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think a really good class for this is CSE 110. So in CSE 110, basically the point of the class is you build up a web application. I believe it's taught by like Thomas Powell this quarter, but like you build up a web application, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's a really good chance to get a project under your belt. You work with a team also, and you like can implement some like typical team strategies. So when I talk with Gary, for example, we did like Agile, which is a really common, I guess like team management strategy. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but a lot of companies too, like if you know Agile, they'd be pretty impressed because it's a good way to organize your work and like delegate work as well to other people. But yeah. Cool. And also just like adding on to that, some other relevant classes to preparing for your interviews. One that's really important is CSE 12. I had CSE 12 with Gary. I think this is his last quarter teaching 12 this quarter, unfortunately, but he really like drills into like knowing your data structures and the principles of object-oriented design. So it's really important that you pay attention to this class and do well. I think this is the one class that like really made me into a better programmer, just because although it was like super difficult at first, like it really forces you to learn and like understand what's truly going on. And generally just like really makes you learn those fundamentals. So make sure you pay a lot of attention in that class. Another one, CSE 100. So here's our beloved Nima Moshiri. But he is a great professor. Advanced data structure is super important. So a lot of times in interviews, they'll ask you like questions about data structure. Sometimes they'll even ask you to like implement a data structure from scratch. So I've actually had like several interviews where they're like, oh, like implement a stack from scratch. And like you'll do that. And sometimes they'll be like, okay, do this additional feature, like you wanted to do this. But knowing how to like implement a data structure from scratch, if not like all the data structures you learn, is pretty important. I think in a lot of these classes you actually do it from scratch, but it's important like to know that you're not doing this for no reason. Like these are super important skills that you should take away and think about for your actual interviews. And then another one is CSE 101. I think this is taught by Miles Jones, and I think there's someone else that teaches it this quarter. But another really good class, just knowing your algorithms. So this is the class you learn like DFS, BFS, that kind of stuff, like super important algorithms you should know for your interviews. A lot of times these LeetCode questions utilize algorithms that you'll learn in this class. So just make sure you pay really good attention to what goes on inside of this class. And yeah, so we also linked this this PDF. So I don't know, Tang, could you link these slides actually in the chat? Okay, and I also link, this is the resume tips doc. So this is made by Alistair, Kendall, and Bryce I think last year. But it's a lot of really, really good tips on like how to make a good resume. So I highly suggest like you read through this. Just like make sure you take into account like everything that's put in here, because the people that made this have done really good in their interviews and stuff like that. Their resumes are great. And I generally think these are just like really good tips you should take away. Yeah. And yeah, we're getting to the end now, but some general advice that I think is important to know. One, keep your resume on one page. I see this mistake a lot with like freshmen that like have a lot of like high school experience, or like maybe people that just have a bunch of extracurriculars and they're like, oh, I can't fit everything on a one page. Unfortunately, you really do have to squeeze it all into one page. Despite like maybe you having a ton of experience, you really should know you really should be able to condense all of that onto one page, because recruiters, like I said before, are going to spend 15 to like maybe 60 seconds on your resume at most. And if you have 2 pages, they're not going to take the time to scroll through all that. You want to make sure important stuff is super clear to the interviewer, the recruiter, because they're really not going to waste too much time looking at you specifically. One thing is like put your education at the top. I think a lot of people, this depends like what you want to do. You can also have a summary at the top if you want, but I think typically like education is one of the most important things. Just having a degree in CS from UCSD looks super good, and not even just CS, like data science, math, CS, related majors like that. You really want to make sure you have your education, and if you have like a good GPA, for example, put that as well in that education section. Also, like I put this order before, but like experience should go after. So if you have like job opportunities, jobs that you've done, research stuff you've done, put that below your education. And then lastly, if you have personal projects you worked on, so hackathon projects, maybe just something cool you've worked on, that would go below your actual work experience that you've had. And then, yeah, leadership experience, if you have room for that, you can, for me, like I actually merge my leadership experience into my like regular experience section. So if you have like a position in an org that you think you've done a lot of work in, you can merge that in. You could also have that as a separate section if you'd like. And then like skills and interests would follow that. So skills, I would say, should go at the bottom of your resume. The reasons behind this is that you should be able to prove your skills through your experience and your projects. Like I said before, like if you say you have all this experience in a certain skill, but you can't back it up with a project or experience, it doesn't look super good. So you should be able to already like prove that experience, prove those skills with your experience and your projects. And then like afterwards, you can list that at the bottom. One thing too is like, I would suggest only to put your GPA if it's above 3.0. If you have a major GPA, I would say like if it's higher than a 3.0, then use that instead. You could just say major GPA. But yeah, sometimes that can do more harm than good if you have below a 3.0. Descriptions are also super important. So just like be really careful with the wording. A lot of times, like since for me at least, like I would look at my resume so much that I wouldn't even notice I had like a typo in my resume. So have someone else proofread your resume, because you don't always realize like something sounds really weird how you worded it, or like it's not super clear. So make sure you get your resume reviewed by someone else. But just be like super descriptive in how you bullets. So this is just an example that we pulled from before, but like instead of saying you just created a database, you could say like you improved efficiency and productivity by 25%. You could also be more specific. You'd be like, I created a MongoDB database that like utilizes like API, for example, to track applications, and then also using metrics. So this 25% metric, for example, is important. Showing that you like made some visible impact through some sort of metric looks pretty good on your resume. So if you can utilize that, like sometimes there's stuff you can't really give a metric to, it's fine. But if you can use some sort of metric, take advantage of that because it'll make you look better in the end. And what else? Traits you want to demonstrate. So yeah, also just like these are important tips, like stuff you want to actually show on your resume. So obviously like your technical knowledge, ability to work in teams. So like I was saying before, like knowing agile stuff is really important for working in teams. Like it shows that you have an organized way of like delegating work. Also just like, you know, if you want to fill up some space in your resume, you can also explain like what you did with teams, your leadership, I guess, abilities, that kind of stuff. You can emphasize those in your bullets. And then also like personal qualities of conscientiousness and initiative. So this is something you can put in maybe a summary section if you want to include that in your resume. I know Apple, for example, really likes you having a summary section at the top. But show that like you have some sort of initiative, like you're not just doing this to make money. You have some like other motivations for doing this. Like maybe you really enjoy machine learning or like making some sort of positive impact. Those are things that like companies think are really cool. You don't want to just be like another robot, like another drone. If you show that like, you're really passionate about like one specific thing, or like you really want to make an impact, that in the end will look really good for you. And yeah, I guess just a few more things. So these are on the slides that we for, but NEMA's data structures course is all open source. So if you're interested in learning data structures and maybe you're not a CS major or you just want to get ahead on learning data structures, you can check out the Step It guide. So I believe if you sign up with your UCSD email, you should be able to have free access to this. And it's just like all the data structures you pretty much need to know and more for your interviews. So highly suggest checking that out. It's a super valuable resource. We have a resource for also just like general coding interview tips. Feel free to check that out. And then as I was saying before, like there's a lot of CS Discord channels. I think these are like some of the best ways that you can find job opportunities because you know you could look on Glassdoor and LinkedIn and those kind of websites and you'll find listings on there, but like the people in these Discords are kind of sweats. Like I can't lie. These are people that are like on top of like knowing job listings and they will post like immediately after it's posted. And statistically, if you're one of the first people to apply for a job, you have a much higher chance of getting that position. I statistic a few months ago, and I wish I could find the diagram here, but statistically, if you apply within the first 48 hours of a job listing like being posted, you have like a significantly higher chance of actually landing that position. So the sooner you actually get on that, the better the chance you have of actually landing that position. This varies from like company to company. Like Amazon, for example, is like rolling, but if it's like a smaller startup company, you really want to be in that like first pool of applicants. And so we also link the ACM Discord. So feel free to check out ACM Discord if you're in or not in there already. I'm assuming a lot of you guys are. And I also just wanted to plug CS for Each. So this is my organization. We do community outreach stuff. We work with high schools in specifically Southern San Diego, and we help engage our students with computer science because a lot of these students don't have great access to CS educational resources. So if you're interested in that, and we also have a projects program that you can apply for that ends this Friday. Feel free to check that out whenever you have the time. But yeah.
Yeah, so I know that was a mouthful, but trust me, we had the slides. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or David on on Discord or find us on Facebook. But now we want to do a panel. I want to introduce two people. We have Alistair and Yada here, and they both have a lot of experience at like top tech companies and have a lot of experience applying and whatnot. So Yada and Alistair, you guys could take maybe like a few minutes to just let me spotlight you guys real quick. David, if you mind stop sharing. Yeah, if you guys both want to quickly go over your guys' like experience, and then we can go into like questions. So everybody prepare your questions. They'll introduce themselves and then we'll go straight into questions. But yeah.
I can go first. Hi, I'm Alistair. I'm a fourth year, but I'm actually taking the quarter off right now for fall internship. So feel free to ask me about that. I interned at Duolingo over the summer and Facebook now. And I've had internship offers from Amazon, and then I've had full-time offer from Microsoft and various interviews at places. So yeah.
Hi, my name is Yara. I'm currently a fourth year. I study math and computer science, have a minor in design. In terms of work experience, I worked at a VR education startup before, and last summer, I did a rotational internship at a bank. So I started with product management and then rotated into user experience design, and then finished in software engineering. And then this year, I did a software engineering internship at Apple, and then I'll be returning in Apple full-time starting January.
Awesome. Yeah. So we're now open up to questions. If you guys want to type it in the chat or unmute and speak.
Feel free to ask anything about any aspect of the process.
All right. So I think there's a question in the chat. So what were your guys' study methods preparation looked like?
Yeah, I can go first. In terms of technical interviews, I had a copy of the cracking the coding interview, so I read that. I did like 60-ish leak code problems, which is not actually that many, but I think I got the hang of it pretty quickly. And actually, OAs, you end up doing a lot of leak code like problems anyways through OAs. Yeah, so that's how I prepared technically. And then behaviorally, I just came up with a few scenarios that I could talk about, like a project or some experience that could be adapted to a bunch of different situations. Walked through a bunch of behavioral questions and seen, practiced fitting a scenario to each question. And then that serves me pretty well in behavioral.
Yeah, so there are two parts. So for the coding interview, just leak code, I mostly got graph questions, and that's what I was comfortable with. And I guess that's like luck, I guess. And then as for the interview itself, behavioral interview, I think I really want to emphasize is like the attitude you bring into your interview, because mostly if you're interviewing for an intern or new grad, I think it's very important that you show that they can, like, you're someone who's willing to learn, because you're not going to go into a job knowing everything. Well, if you do, that's great, but most of the time you're not. And so they don't expect you to know everything. Basically, keep a positive attitude and listen carefully to what they have to say. I think there should be a section where you get to ask them questions. And I think it's very good if you ask them a lot of questions, because that shows that you have a lot of interest. Definitely don't end with like, no, I don't have any questions, or that's good for now. You could look up your interviewers like job history on LinkedIn, and then prepare some questions about the job and what they're doing beforehand. Really prepare a lot of questions, because I think that shows, I think that should really add a lot of points for you, because yeah. Oh, that's a lot of questions.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'll ask the next question. So if you do get an interview, usually how soon is it from when you first applied for the job?
I'd say it varies. Some companies it can be like a week. Some companies it can be like months. I think for like Microsoft, for example, it can like take like 2 to 3 months for you to actually hear back. But companies like maybe like Amazon usually get back to you pretty fast. Yeah, I don't know if you guys want to add on to that.
Yeah, I've had situations where like the OA took a month after applying, or often it's automated, so it goes out right away. And then interviews are usually like at least a week or so, but it can be, I think it was multiple months for Duolingo between me finishing the OA and getting an interview.
Awesome. All right. Next question from Laura is, how much about a company should you know about them before you go into an interview?
I would say like whatever they have on their website that you can learn, try to just know as best you can. Because that's like the public face of the company. You're not going to know about like their internal products super well. And they don't expect you to know like everything about the company or like what's being worked on. But what they do show you, like the resources they give you to study, a lot of that will be available online for you to look up. So just try to know that as best you can. And yeah, these are also like super important, like Alistair was saying before, or like Diado was saying before, to just like ask questions about the company too, and like the stuff that like the software engineers that are interviewing you are acting on, because they like it when you show that you're like interested in what's actually being done at the company.
Yeah, I would say definitely do research into what the company does before your interview if you're not exactly sure. If it's like a business that serves customers, then it might be a better thing if you've actually like tried out the product. If they're like a business that sells products to other businesses, then maybe not so much, but you should definitely have a feeling for what kind of market they're operating in.
Awesome. All right, we got 2 more questions. We might go a little over, but if you guys don't mind, Thomas asked, what was your least favorite part of the interview process you had, but that you've had overcome and held a positive attitude towards?
Go ahead, Yana.
I guess I just don't like applying to jobs online. I just feel like I'm dropping my resume in a black hole. It's not fun. I don't know about how you guys feel about it. How did I overcome it? Just force myself to do it, set a goal like of how many you want to do per day or per week, and then just do it, and then don't think too much about it. I don't know. Yeah.
I kind of have like the opposite answer, and this isn't something that you should listen to, kids, but it's true. I cannot talk to people in person, so I have been to one career fair, hated it, only apply to things online. And I guess the way to overcome that is just apply lots of places online and don't make any human connections. But again, that's probably not something that you should be doing.
I don't know how I feel about that advice, but
That's not advice.
yeah.
Do the opposite of that.
Do the opposite of that. Yeah. I'd say for me, like the least favorite part was like just applying, like just throwing your resume into a black box and then like never getting any response to the company. I think for me, like last year specifically, so not this past summer, but like the summer before, I applied to over 200 companies for internships and I got rejected from every single one. I did not get an internship offer. So what happened was I was going to intern with the company that summer. And they canceled on me because of COVID, which is kind of a bummer, but they gave me like an offer to do it this summer. So I ended up going with them because I didn't get any other offers. But yeah, that's like super discouraging. You apply to like hundreds of places literally, and like sometimes you just won't hear back. But like all I can say is you just got to keep trying. Like I eventually did get a job offer, which like, super relieving when you finally do. But just know like you're not alone. Everyone's struggling through this. It's really hard to get an offer. Like you do have to grind a lot. But just keep a positive attitude. Like don't lose hope. Just keep trying your best, and that's like all you really can do in this process.
Awesome. All right, we got one last question is, do you guys usually do internships during the summer, or are you guys able to do internships during school quarters?
So it's possible to do it not during the summer. A large majority of internships will be during the summer, however. UCSD, thankfully, they make it pretty easy. You can just take a quarter off and you don't need to file any paperwork or anything. But there's not a ton of companies who are going to do internships outside of the summer. For general applicants, there are some like Canadian universities where they have university required co-ops, which means that they have to be off season, but it's not incredibly common. If you can do it, I recommend it because more experience is good, but it's not always possible.
One thing to add to that, if you're on F1 visa or like on visa in general, you might want to check about the consequences of getting a quarter off. And if you take a quarter off, I know for F1 visa, if you take a quarter off, you can't be in the United States. But yeah, so just a reminder in case I don't want to screw up your visa,
Yeah, and just to kind of like add on that too, one thing we didn't mention too is kind of like, when do you apply for these types of internships? So normally for summer internships, you apply the fall before. So anytime from literally like August to December is when kind of like all the big Fortune 500 companies, all the tech companies, they release their applications. If you want to get a fall internship, you start applying at the beginning of summer. So if you want to kind of take a quarter off, you really got to look at least 4 to 5 months before that season starts. Winter internships, which kind of like starting in January, normally I've seen kind of like, July, August, kind of like early fall. And then for spring is kind of like November, December, going into January, February. So just be aware of the timeline. Whatever season you want to apply to, look at least 5 or even 6 months before that season actually starts, in order to get those internships.
I would honestly say like sometimes even earlier than August, you should be applying. Like for me, I started applying like early July, and I think like a lot of companies start opening applications in July for like the summer of next year. So almost an entire year ahead, you should start applying. And especially for like fall internships too, I would say like apply in the spring, like early spring, not early summer, because like a lot of times like companies have already closed their applications by early summer. So the earlier the better, honestly. Tech companies are like notorious for doing it like really, really early. So make sure like you're on top of that like in the summer before. Don't put it off till too late, because it's just going to make your life a lot harder.
Awesome. All right, so there seems not to be any other questions. So last call for questions. Give it 10 seconds.
Give it like 30 seconds. We don't need to.
30 seconds. All right, perfect. Edward asks, how much time do you guys spend looking and applying for internships? Is it something I should be doing every day? I'll quickly highlight my experience. I did a lot, and what I did is I kind of had a routine, since it's kind of like, you can apply to some every day, but I remember I specifically set 2 days a week to apply for an hour. But you'll probably have to apply in the hundreds, to be honest. There's the infamous Bryce. He's the VP of events for ACM, and he applied to 1,000 internships before ending up interning at Amazon. So it could be a lot. I would say for me personally, like, not making a fun thing, but to have like a set time so you don't get burned out. Like, don't do it for like 5 hours every day for a week, then never do it again. I say spread it out. But that's what's worked for me.
Yeah, I'd say it varies from person to person too. I don't know. I just applied throughout the summer, honestly. When I did those 200 applications, I didn't do it like all in like a week. I did that throughout like the course of like 3 months, for example. So you don't need to do it like every single day, because it is kind of time consuming, but just stay diligent. Yeah, and just don't overwhelm yourself too. I would say just like it's really easy to get like overwhelmed with OAs, so don't like take too much on at once.
All right. We've a little bit more. Any last questions, everyone? Thanks for staying over, by the way, Alistair and Yada. We really appreciate it. All right. It seems like there's no more questions. Just wanted to say thank you for everybody showing out. And like I said, feel free to kind of reach out to any of us if you have any further questions or want to learn more about our experience. Once again, thank you so much to Alistair and Yada. We really appreciate your time. And yeah, hope everybody has a good day and good luck applying to internships, everybody. Awesome. All right. You're going to close the room, David?